How to do NVC when someone has narcissism is what you've asked me a lot.
But if you're like me, you've learned from Marshall Rosenberg with NVC that diagnosing people can be tricky, can be disconnecting. I will explain in this video how to use diagnosis responsibly while also communicating effectively with those around you who may have narcissism, whether you're co-parenting with them, maybe have to collaborate with them, or maybe you just started to date them. To create this video, I've read books, I've talked with expert therapists and NVC trainers, and I read over 60 emails that you send me about your experiences with NVC and narcissism. And I boiled it all down to 5 action steps that we're going to cover right now. Note that I'm not a clinical therapist, and this video is for educational purposes only. Step 1, let's look at what is narcissism actually and how to spot it. So narcissism is often used as a way to describe people who are a little bit self-centered or maybe a little bit egoistic. This is not how we're using it here. We're going with the official diagnosis, which is narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, which affects up to 1% of people. And then additionally, there is up to 5% of people who have significant traits of it. So about 1 in 20 people have it. So you probably know someone. To be diagnosed, you need to have at least 5 of the following symptoms: a grandiose sense of self-importance, a preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love, a belief that you're special and unique and can only be understood by or should associate with other high-status people or institutions, a requirement for excessive admiration, a sense of entitlement, interpersonally exploitative behavior, lack of empathy, envy of others or belief that others are envious of you, demonstration of arrogant and haughty behaviors or attitudes. So there are 2 forms of narcissism. One is the grandiose narcissism, which is kind of like the stereotypical one, and there is something called covert narcissism, which is harder to detect because these people don't have these grandiose behaviors, but they do have a lot of the other symptoms of narcissism. Now I want to help us go beyond the stigma by emphasizing that narcissism is partially caused by hereditary factors, but partially, or a big part, by trauma. So when we all as children, when we experience trauma like abuse or neglect, and we don't learn any ways to navigate our feelings, we respond with some sort of coping mechanism, right? And this can be substance abuse, this can be people pleasing, most people I work with are of that category, or it can be narcissism. So narcissism is a way to deal with pain that we don't know how else to deal with. Now, knowing the symptoms is not enough to really spot narcissism, because most people with narcissism will show you their best side in the beginning. So after watching a lot of videos and things about how to spot things early on, I felt like there were two big factors that can help you. So the first one is that you want to, when you get to know a new person, you want to slow down the contact. So that actually, because you can only keep on your mask for so long, right? So for someone with NPD, that can only last for so long. And if in this period you see them a lot and you bond with them a lot, the bond is already there by the time that maybe there are some cracks in the mask, right? So you want to make sure that there's enough time in between seeing a new person so that you can really evaluate and get back to yourself, especially the type of people that usually bond with people with narcissism are sensitive to wanting that validation that they're giving in the beginning, for example. And so the first thing is really to slow things down and to slow down also the progression of a relationship. So letting someone in your house, going to live together with someone, getting married with someone, all of that you want to not do in the first 3 months. And the second thing you want to do early on is to see what happens when you set small boundaries. So for example, my name is Pamela, but I prefer if you call me Pam. Or, you know, you were going to meet today, but you cancel because you don't feel good. Or you want to say, I don't want to text every day, I just want to text twice a week, right? And then see how someone responds. Do they respond with anger? Do they start to guilt trip? Do they just ignore your boundary? Those are big signs, and they might not even mean someone is a narcissist, right? We might not know that at this point. We might never really be sure about that. But these are signs to take seriously for yourself in general. And lastly, don't blame yourself if it took you a long time to find out what was going on with someone. I heard from the world's most famous therapist in this area that it takes her usually up to 6 sessions to find out that someone has NPD. And this is about people that willingly went to her to get help, right? And to talk about how they think and how they feel. So keep in mind that it's just extremely hard to detect. So step 2 is using the diagnosis responsibly, so we don't cause more harm, but still can also get the benefits of it. If a professional has made it, I think it's very useful. For people dealing with narcissism, it's often important that someone helps them to recognize what is happening and to take it seriously. Because often we talk about situations where there's mental and physical harm. Sometimes the situation is life-threatening, right? So it's very helpful that there is a term that can help you understand what's happening and to take it seriously. Also, for people with NPD themselves, I heard someone say that, I always felt I was different. I never understood what it was. And then someone told me that term, and then I was able to find specialized help for myself. I was able to find other people that felt were dealing with the same thing, and I managed to get a much better life and to hurt less people. And secondly, in the stage before that, when you're not sure yet what you're dealing with, but you have a suspicion, it's just helpful to have a term so you can find a specialized support that can see if you're right or not, or whether maybe it's something else that you're dealing with. So when is it not helpful to use the term? So first of all, when we overuse it, just because someone has some behavior that is unpleasant, right? And I think it's important that it starts to seem almost like we're not justified in our pain when someone doesn't have like a big fat label, right? And that's not true. We're totally justified to leave a relationship or to be unhappy with someone without them having this huge label, right? So we just also need to take people's behavior at face value, no matter what it means or what analysis we can give to it. And we're allowed to set boundaries and respond to that. Secondly, when you tell the person that you think has NPD, the term is so stigmatized. No one wants to admit that they have narcissism, and understandably so, right? It's just like it's being used as a judgment. So that's very unhelpful. Thirdly, if we in our mind don't ever go beyond the diagnosis. So in the early stages, when we want to see what we're dealing with and what's going on, it can be helpful. But at some point, this diagnosis may become like an enemy image and doesn't help us to heal from the relationship, to move on, or to just keep seeing someone as a human being. And lastly, I think if we as a society focus a lot on diagnosis and on diagnosing individuals only, it can mask actually societal problems. So for example, in Western society, we live in a capitalist society, right? And so this asks of us that we work 40 hours a week while also raising kids with just 2 people max. We don't get any education on emotional regulation, and then we're just sort of supposed to figure it out, right? And I think we need to be very mindful of which symptoms our society pathologizes or makes illegal, right? It's usually the symptoms that hamper our functioning in capitalism. So for example, depression, ADHD, also the things that we make, substance abuse, right? Whereas on the other end, when there's an addiction to wealth, which is a thing, it's been researched, it's a real thing, we don't ever hear people talking about that, right? Because that fits perfectly the system that we're in. So how to communicate effectively with people with narcissism? And specifically, which ways do NVC not work? And boy, you've told me it doesn't work. So let's see which way it doesn't work and what to do instead. And also the ways in which it actually does work. So let's look at all of that. So first, just in general, NVC requires everything that is difficult and challenging for someone with NPD. So it requires a sense of equality with other people, it requires taking responsibility for your feelings, and it requires having empathy and respecting someone's boundaries. People with narcissism, they see themselves as superior, they want to avoid taking responsibility, and they want to manipulate other people. Now, this is why most professionals recommend to go no contact with someone who has NPD. But sometimes you might not have a choice, for example, in the case of co-parenting, and sometimes you might just not know. Someone might be on the spectrum or you're not even really sure. So you might want to try some other things first before you go no contact. Now, all of these recommendations are in line with the method that is mentioned the most online that is helpful with people with NPD, which is the gray rock method. And that means that you're gonna basically behave with them like a gray rock, meaning that you're not gonna show your triggers, you're not going to give them anything to respond to. So all of this is in line with that. So the first step in NVC is making an observation, right? But someone with NPD might just simply deny your observation. They might just say, that's not what I said. Or maybe you have screenshots and then they just might say like, you're being paranoid, you're being controlling. So they might just deflect the thing that you're addressing. Now, you still want to use observations as opposed to judgment or interpretation. Again, that's very good not to put any oil on the fire, but just expect there to be denial. Don't argue with that. Instead, just say one of these. I understand that we have different perspectives on this. Let's try to focus on what we can agree on. Or you just repeat back what they're saying and then kind of refocus on the topic. Okay, you think I'm arrogant. I hear that. Now, we were talking about the best time on Tuesday. How does 7 p.m. work? Or you might say, I don't think continuing this conversation is productive right now. Let's revisit it another time. You do want to document your observations or the facts of what are happening, so the messages that are exchanged and everything, if you feel like there might be a sort of legal situation, right? So with co-parenting, that might be the case, or with a situation at work, for example. Now, step 2 or 3 with NVC are sharing your feelings and sharing your needs. Your feelings and needs will most likely be judged by someone with NPD because as a child, their feelings have been either ignored or ridiculed, and so they learn that feelings are a burden. That's how they experience them. So you might still want to share your feeling just to make sure they don't hear something as a judgment. So for example, you might say, I feel stressed when people yell, let's keep our volume low. Right? Then you just say, it's me, it's not you, right? That can be helpful. But don't ever expect a compassionate reaction to your feeling. Get your compassion elsewhere. Now, step 4 in NVC of making a request can be difficult too. They might just ignore your request or even do the exact opposite of what you want. So maybe you'll say, like, could you please drive slower? And they're actually going to drive faster. Right? So this can be quite scary. So let's see how you can adjust the regular way of making a request to making it more likely that it will work. First of all, you want to focus on their qualities, right? There is a deep insecurity in people with NPD. So it can be helpful to tell them something like, I know you're a skilled driver, but I get really anxious at high speeds. Could you please slow down? Or you might just want to emphasize in which way the request is in their own interest. So you can say, if we can agree on this plan, it will show management what we are capable of. Then you can also give them choice, especially if someone tends to rebel. You could say like, hey, I thought of a few ways that we could improve this process. Which one do you think is the best? Right? You give them choice. This is, by the way, helpful with anyone, right? But extra helpful with someone with NPD. And then lastly, about setting boundaries. So I always thought like that's the thing to do. You just need to set boundaries and then everything will work out. Unfortunately, what I heard from the majority of people and professionals is that boundaries usually don't work. This is the whole reason why going no contact is usually the best way to go. However, you might still want to say your boundaries just to give them the information, and just be mindful that you probably are going to need to execute the consequence that you set for your boundary. So I'll give an example. You can say, I don't want to be called after 9 p.m. If you call after that, my phone is on silent and I will answer again in the morning. Now they're going to call you after 9 p.m., right? But your phone is on silent, so it doesn't matter. And you're going to call them back in the morning, right? So it's just to be prepared to do the consequence that you set. You cannot have like some sort of empty threat. 2 more examples. If you drive above the max speed, I won't be traveling with you again. You need to be prepared to not travel with them again. Otherwise you can't say this. Please keep an arm length away from me, otherwise I will need to leave the room and this conversation. Now we talked about expressing in NVC, now let's look at listening empathically in NVC. So the difficult thing about this is that it's not going to be reciprocated, right? So at some point we're going to be exhausted with listening empathically to them. What you can do, however, is continue to listen empathically to them in your head, to prevent getting triggered. So this is what that might look like. You could think to yourself, they are upset because they believe they are worthless. They are anxious and protecting their sanity. Maybe they need empowerment in order to feel safe, right? So you just want to kind of guess feelings and needs to keep connecting with their humanity, and also to keep yourself from getting really worked up. Be careful of thinking that you did not do NVC correctly, right? If you have a doubt about your approach, check with an NVC trainer, let them help you, and let them also tell you that at some point it's not you. Also keep in mind that people with NPD might be NVCers, right? So again, ask for a second opinion if you have any doubts about someone that you're working with or that you're interacting with. So step 5 is having self-care whenever you're in interaction or relationship with someone with NPD. And here we're going to talk about self-connection based on NVC. So we talked about expressing with NVC, listening in NVC, and we're now going to look at self-connection with NVC, because that is absolutely crucial. You've all told me that as well. And I'm just going to give you 3 ways in which you can use NVC to really take care of yourself. So the first one is to do daily self-connection with NVC. So write down your observations, feelings, needs, and requests. And this way, especially because research shows that people with NPD often end up with people who are highly empathic, who are people pleasers, who are codependent. And especially for this group of people, which again I work with a lot, I've noticed that they really need to even figure out that, oh wow, I have needs, you know, and to really be aware of that and aware of their self-worth, and to rebuild this so that it can be prevented that they fall into the same trap again. Secondly, find NVC community. So this can be on a Facebook group or in a course, like make sure that it's a course that has like some sort of group form, or also like what my course does, matches you up with a buddy, so that you can really rebuild your trust in people, because that might be a bit damaged. And thirdly, use NVC to process feelings of grief, shame, guilt, and loss that are often there for people that have had a relationship with someone with NPD. So whether maybe you were raised by someone or had a long-term love relationship, especially in those cases, there can be a big feeling of loss. And you want to process that properly also, so that you can be available for more healthy people to have a relationship with again in the future. So find a professional who can really guide you through this. Now, there are several other ways in which people can be empathically challenged. In my beginner's course, I cover those. I also cover other things you need to know about navigating narcissism, a bit more detailed. And I go into how to process grief about past relationships and prepare for a healthy future relationship. So send me an email if you want to know about that.